Good morning and welcome to episode number 8 of Other Stages. I'm your host, Tony Imperatrice. My very special guest today is once again synthesizer pioneer and great all-around musician Don Lewis. Also, later in the show, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Rogue Festival, which you can enjoy this year online. Luck. How important is luck? Do you believe that luck plays a big part in our lives? Or do you believe that somehow we have to make our own luck? Some people don't believe in luck at all. But I think most of us know that luck is a bigger factor in life than maybe we want to admit to. In my life, luck has been a big player. It was those serendipitous moments that have driven my life forward. So my first piece of music today is by Johann Sebastian Bach. It is from the collection known as the 8 Little Preludes and Fugues. They're short, they're sweet. I'm going to play the prelude part right now, and then I'll play the fugue part at the end of the show, so stick around for that. Now, they're called the Little Preludes and Fugues. Well, I don't think there's anything little about any of the music of Bach. So here's the prelude section from the Prelude and Fugue in G major. So today we're going to enjoy part 2 of my interview with Don Lewis. Last week we learned about Don's early years, and today we're going to hear a little bit about his professional life and how he went from being a full-time electronics engineer into being a full-time musician. These interview segments were recorded on 2 days with Don Lewis via video chat. And I have over 5 hours of conversation with Don, and all of it is wonderful and inspiring, but obviously I can't include all of it in the context of this broadcast. So, in editing things down, I tried to bring out those things that really enhanced the movie about Don Lewis. The Ballad of Don Lewis. This is a wonderful documentary, and everybody should get a copy of it. There is, of course, a link in the show's description. This film is loaded, of course, with lots of information about Don, but it also reveals a lot of details about the music business in the 70s and 80s. So if you're a music fan, you will really like this film and want to see it again and again. So here is part 2 of my conversation with Don Lewis.
I had also a lead on another job at Honeywell from a column that was in either Ebony or Jet magazine. And there was this guy by the name of Dale Jackson, who was the, now we call human resources, would be personnel manager back in the day. Personnel manager, and he was black, of course. And so I called Honeywell and got an interview set up. And so I went out and did the interview. There was an examination to see how knowledgeable I was. There were 2 job openings, and at the same time there was another young man, a white gentleman, who ended up being, we were really close friends, Gary Van Norton. Gary got the job, and I didn't get the job because in that interview, the foreman, it was an entry job. It wasn't a big
Mm-hmm.
We just wanted a job.
Right.
And the foreman came in, Don Tapp, I'll never forget this, and he saw that I was black, I'm sure, and up until that time, there was not a black male on the assembly line. The only blacks that worked there were in the warehouse, in the stockroom, males. And I lived in the same neighborhood, and we used to carpool. And I was so anyway. When I called and found out that I didn't get the job, I called Dale. I kept him informed, and Dale says, "What? You passed it?" He said, "He passed the exam." And so Dale went to bat for me, and I got the job. About a year later, there's another posting, 2 jobs in the test area. This is moving up the ladder, okay? Engineering test. And so Gary and I both go in, and we max the test, and we both got the job. No objection this time. We had to troubleshoot product that came off the assembly line, like the cards. Sometimes you get a defective part. It's not a part. It's not a fault of the assembler, but a defective part would go in, and then we had to discover what that was, and that was. I mean, I can't remember all the stuff we had to learn to do to test those cards out, and then to troubleshoot them, and then put them back into action to repair before they went into the assemblies. Sometimes Gary would get a card that was making his head scratch. He'd give it to me, and I have to admit, I gave him more cards than he gave me. And then he would give them back. I was minister of music at Macedonia, so I was rehearsing the choir once a week on Thursday night, and then I got this invitation to accompany one of the singers. Actually, it was a pastor's wife, M.C. Williams' wife, Reverend M.C. Williams of New Hope Baptist Church, and she was an opera singer. Her name was Anna Lee. Mm-hmm. Actually, she sang at Carnegie Hall. So I was very honored that she would ask me to accompany her on a local TV show that she was putting on. The television station did not have an organ, and she wanted me to accompany her on the organ. And so there was this organ dealer that sold Seeberg organs. I don't know if you've ever heard of Seeberg.
The only thing I've heard of on Seeberg was, I believe, jukeboxes.
Yes, but
so just like Wurlitzer,
yes,
they built both.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I walk in and he says, "Hey, Donnie." He calls me Donnie from the very beginning. He says, "I got a sandwich waiting on me next door to pick up. I need to go over there. I'll just sit down there and find. I'll show you how it works when you get back." Okay. And he said, "But go ahead and play around on it." So he goes over there. He's over there for about maybe 5-10 minutes. He comes back with his sandwich and he walks over and he says, "How'd you get that?" I said, "Well, I did this and I did this and I did this and this is this." "Oh man, play me some more." I said, "You're supposed to be showing me how this thing works." But I ended up playing for her on that broadcast, on that telecast, and it's almost simultaneously. A few weeks later, I ended up playing in a restaurant called Mr. G's, and Mr. G's was the in place to go in Denver. It was a brand new restaurant, lava rock. Fireplaces. It was more than one. It was a Mediterranean motif, and line out the door to get in. About a year after I was working at Honeywell. I was working at Mr. G's. I was working at Macedonia. What other time did I have? I don't know how I did it. You don't know how you do these things when you're young, but you just do them.
You just do it, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get a little older and wiser and say, "Then I'm going to be a little pickier."
Yes. Yes. I guess it was after my first year at Mr. G's. Some of the people found out at work. Some of my bosses at work found out that I was working at Mr. G's, and these were middle management or management people. And so they were having a Christmas party or something. And so they came out to Mr. G's to see me play and all that. And so I didn't know this until I turned in my resignation about a year later, that there was a pool of my bosses when I was going to quit Honeywell and go full time. Being a musician. I guess they didn't see the same kind of joy me in front of this console as I was having as I was sitting behind the keyboard. But that's what they thought, and I didn't find out that until he says, "I said, well, who won the pool?" Mike Schwartz says, "I want it." He was my boss in that department, and his boss, Danny Palmisani, he says, "Yeah, he won it."
Okay, actually, starting with the idea of leaving Honeywell and actually looking at music as being a career, it wasn't really baked. It wasn't really in stone at that time. I was still toying with the idea, but I wanted to have at least a backup to the music side that I thought I could have at least some income coming in.
Right.
And so that's when I started working at the Metro Denver Hammond Organ Studio. So I did make that leap of faith to go there, but I had also other ulterior motive, and that was I still want to be able to practice. So with all those pianos and organs in that store, between telephone calls, following up leads and things like that. And I started using this instrument. I bought one, started using it in the new place that I was playing down in Brooks Towers in Denver, and it was called Gitana at that time, Gitana Restaurant. And one of the executives, Tom Thompson, I don't know if you remember Tom Thompson. He was one of the marketing managers of Hammond. I think he was at that time in education, because he was doing a lot of educational work for Hammond. And he had come out to meet with Bill Barber, the owner of a Hammond organ store there, and Bill brought him down to see me at Gitana. And Tom got on the phone immediately and called his boss, who was Jack Ripberger at the time at Hammond. Jack got on the plane the next day, and the next evening he was there listening to me play. And then I got an offer from Jack to come in 1969 to come to the NAMM show for Hammond. And that's where my life started really changing, outside of the Denver situation.
Sure.
By this time in Denver, I had gathered quite a following as far as fans were concerned, and I was fortunate enough to meet a gentleman who became one of my big fans, Dave McKay Williams. That name will ring with some of the organists. He was the dean of the organ department at Juilliard. He had retired. He had retired. He was also a hymn writer, and evidently wrote some pretty wild things for the Episcopal Church. Anyway, David would come down every evening and sit at the bar. He had lost most of his hearing. Oh. He would sit at the bar, though. He heard me through holding on to the bar. One night, David comes in, and uncharacteristically of David, he walks up while I'm playing, because he never would do that. And he looked at me, and I knew it was something important. And he looked at me and he says, "Young man, I don't want you to be alarmed, but having dinner with me in the next room is Virgil Fox." I said, "David, I'm going to kill you. Get out of here." So getting back to my point about the X77 having a completely different sound than most of the Hammonds that we had heard before. So after their dinner, Virgil comes in and he compliments me, and he says, "Well, what kind of organ is this?" I said, "It's a Hammond." And he says, "It's not." I said, "Well, look at the sign on it." He says, "Well, it doesn't sound like a Hammond." I said, "This is a brand new model that came out with called the X77. 1969, when Hammond asked me to come to the NAMM show. I'm all over the place, but I'm just trying to fill in some of these gaps to let people understand what affected me, things that affected me, and not knowing that it would shape the way I would think about things. And so I go to the NAMM show, and with my Ace Tone rhythm unit that I bought to go on top of my X77 Hammond, and I had wired it in to the expression pedal circuit so that it would actually be dynamic as far as expression was concerned. So when I would pop that expression pedal, I could accent the rhythms. Okay. On top of that, I had changed quite a few of the rhythms inside the ace tone,
Mm-hmm.
and retuned some of the drum sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got to play this at the NAMM show for Hammond, Kakahashi, Ikitaro Kakahashi, who was the founder of Roland, eventually, then was president of Ace Tone. He was in the audience, and he came up after my concert and said, "That looks like my instrument, but it doesn't sound like it. That looks like my rhythm machine, but it doesn't sound like. What did you do to it?" And so I opened it up and I showed him. That's where we began our relationship. 2 years later, less than 2 years later, he invited me to come to Japan. And from then on, I was going to Japan before Roland and then during Roland. Off and on for what, 45 years.
You had a lot to do with a lot of the development and products at Roland.
Especially the early stuff, the rhythm units, that was their bread and butter. That and guitar amplifiers, and finally, I guess, effects boxes for guitars. Mm-hmm. And then when they got into synthesizers, they were having a tough time trying to figure out how to get the oscillators to track, because you're only playing one note at a time. You remember, right. These were monophonic keyboards, and because they only had one or two oscillators in them, so what do you expect?
Yeah.
But anyway, they were solo instruments for the most part, but they were having a hard time trying to figure out how to make them track accurately. And I told them about a circuit that I knew about, and about splitting the octave into equal parts for 1 volt change in pitch. So in other words, 1 volt per octave.
Okay.
So if you had 5 octaves, you would have 5 volts.
Differential from top to bottom.
Yeah, and then what you would do is to in between those it was a series circuit, and you would put a 100 ohm resistor and divide it 12 times, and that would give you if it was tracking correctly, that would give you that octave. So
okay.
You want just
so it's a voltage divider circuit.
Yes.
And all equal resistance, of course. So theoretically, that would give you equal temperament.
Yeah. Right.
Cool. And but the resistors have to be pretty accurate.
Within 1%, I think it was. I think
you
could get 1%. Yeah. So that's the way they did it, and he was very grateful for that information, because he had just started doing started thinking about the synthesizers, because in '72 is when I started working with ARP, and anyway, so I don't know where did I end up. So that's where I started with Kakahashi. Mm-hmm. And I was still working with Hammond. Hammond, and Kakahashi were actually working together, because Kakahashi developed the Piper, which was one of the big products that Hammond came out with. It was a one keyboard home play kind of organ.
Easy play.
Play, press a note and you get a chord on the bottom end and so forth. And it was a big thing. And Rosemary Bailey actually was she headed up. They had a group of girls called the Piperettes.
Oh, okay. So like a Piper organ band. Oh,
Yes,
wow.
but the very next year, I went to Japan. I toured Japan for about 3 weeks. I remember you had to get a visa in those days to go to Japan. So I had to fly from Denver to San Francisco, where the consulate was, and stay overnight. You go in and give them, and then they had to have it approved from Japan, and you had to wait overnight. So
wow.
I always had to get a hotel, and then go down to the consulate, get my visa, then go back out to SFO and get on the plane and fly to Japan. That's how we had to do it for early days.
Yeah.
And
what a rigmarole.
Yeah. And so I did that for many years. And products that he would come out with, because they were on. Starting up Roland was a big thing, and so it was a very small startup. And he had no one when we go to NAMM show, he had no one to actually demonstrate the instrument. So between my Hammond concert, I would leave there and then go downstairs and play the instruments for him.
Roland stuff.
Well, yeah, and I think he was eternally grateful for my help in that way. But we would go out for dinner and sit there and get napkins and draw circuits and ideas and stuff. That's how we kept our ideas going. And I was pushing him the whole time. I said, I want programmable rhythm. I want programmable rhythm. He says, that costs too much. It costs too much. Those days was a mini computer would cost you $25,000. Well,
yeah.
Yeah, no. He says, we have to wait a while. But between that and him developing the synthesizers, I helped with that. They would fly me over when they were in breadboard or getting ready to do pre-production to work with them and iron out any things I thought was musically not working or mechanically not working. Of course, we as you know, we interviewed him extensively for the documentary. There's so much stuff in that documentary that was filmed that we couldn't put in the documentary. That would be another documentary about him.
Sure.
And the funny thing that happened when we were interviewing him for the documentary is Ned Augustenborg, who's the director for that. The guy who's supposed to be his sound guy bailed on him the day before he was to leave for Japan, so he had nobody to do the sound. So I ended up being the sound guy, and I'm standing there on the side holding this boom, and he was asking questions, and I probably would never have asked Taro, and I had to hold back tears because I never heard these things from him, because we never had those kinds of conversations. And I never knew I meant that much to him. In 72, all this stuff happening in 72. So Roland starts in 72. Hammond sends me down to Stanford University in 72 to see what John Chowning was doing at Karma. It wasn't Karma at that time, but and he was working with FM, frequency modulation digital synthesis. And I saw that, and the second thing he was working on was psychoacoustics. And he had a.
And this is in 72?
This is in 72.
Wow. I didn't realize that started that early.
Yes, that was the
Wow.
first. That was the year Howie Moore had been hired to be over the engineering of Hammond. He came from General Electric, I believe. And Howie and I hit it off very well, and I became a part of his inner circle. And so he sent me, and I think Rosemary went down too. I don't know if we went down at the same time, but he sent both of us down to Stanford to see what John Chowning was doing. And so anyway, I went back to Hammond, and I was talking with the engineers, and I said, this is the next tone wheel. And they haven't done anything since tone wheel at that point. I think that by that time, the Concorde hadn't come out yet. The Concorde hadn't come out, and they started LSI. I think back in it, was it 74? I think it was about 74 they started LSI coming. The Concorde came out in there about that time. Anyway, and so I was very interested in FM, and this is back in 72. Well, FM didn't really hit the market big until 83. So that's about 11 years later. Wow. That's a long time.
It is. Because the first product would have been the DX7, right?
Right. The first production was, as far as the United States was concerned, they had one instrument called, I think it was called the G1 or something like that, that was the predecessor to the DX7. And it was more experimental, R&D kind of instrument. When the 7 came out, man, the DX7 came out, it was crazy. And prior to that, about 1980, I went back to Stanford as a student in their summer workshop for FM and digital computation. And so I was there. I think that course was about 8 weeks long. So that was like 1980, and it was 83, about January 83, when I was asked to start working with Yamaha. I was working at the Hungry Tiger. This is after I built Leo, of course. Mm-hmm. I built Leo back in 77 when we completed it. And Gary Leuenberger was the guy who brought me into the fold with Yamaha, and he had a big Yamaha store here in San Francisco. Leuenberger's down there on Market Street. And anyway, so that's how that got going. So all of this is still almost NAMM-centered, industry-centered focus. And of course, all of this happened because of the union situation. As far as my focus being changed more from entertaining to the consulting aspect. But I was always lucky that I had not only the consulting with the engineering aspect of these instruments or programming, but also performing. So I was still able to perform, whether it was to a broader audience than my own, as my own. Mm-hmm. But I was always able, the companies always felt as though my value was also in being an artist.
So on next week's show, Don will be sharing with us about how he ended up moving to Los Angeles and then ended up working with Quincy Jones, the Beach Boys, and many others. Don briefly mentioned Leo. Leo is an instrument that you saw pictured in when I first fired up the live stream. Before there was MIDI and a standard way to connect up all of these electronic instruments, Don figured out how to do it on his own, and that was the resulting instrument. We'll learn a little bit more about that, but that's also extensively covered in the documentary. So be sure to come back next week and enjoy part 3 with Don Lewis. Right now, I'm going to play a piece by Claude Debussy, the great French Impressionist composer. And this is a piece originally composed for piano. It's called The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. And this is my organ transcription. Time, talent, and luck. These are the key ingredients to success. In anything that we might choose to do, well, we first have to have some talent. Without it, no amount of drive or determination is going to make that much difference. But the good news is that everyone has some kind of talent. It might be an aptitude for numbers, it might be an innate ability at music. Everyone has something that they're good at and like to do. The trick is to find out just exactly what that is. Time. We have to put in the time. Time for learning, time for practice, time for promoting. No matter how much talent and desire we may possess, if we just sit on our butts, ain't nothing gonna happen. And luck. In my experience, this is the biggest factor in success. No matter how much time we have, no matter how much talent we have, no matter how much we work at something, if a little luck doesn't fall our way, well, we're not going to get all that far. From the time I was a little kid, it was clear to me that I had some talent, and I was willing to put in some time. But all the good breaks came as a matter of chance. It was luck that brought me to my first organ playing job. I just happened to be hanging out in a particular organ store, and I met a guy named Jim Harris, and he was getting tired of playing at the hockey games, and so he recommended me for the job. My first church gig, well, my brother and I were on a double date with two sisters, and their church needed an organist. It was in the mid-'80s that I was between jobs, and the phone rang, and a little church needed an organist. It turned out that the lady I was talking to would end up being my future mother-in-law. Her daughter Eileen is now the best wife ever, and on top of that, she was my kidney donor. She also got us involved in the Rogue Festival. And the Rogue Festival would put my life on an entirely new trajectory at exactly the right time. That is a lot of luck lining up. And speaking of the Rogue Festival, it starts this week, and it's all online, so no matter where you hail from, you can enjoy all the shows. I want to give you some shout-outs for some of the performers that I know who are going to be on this year's Rogue Festival. Donna K. Yarborough is doing her show Rose Gold. Now, a while back, I was privileged to see the workshop version of this, and it was amazing. So I'm sure the finished product is even more amazing. An old classmate of mine, Ed Godot, has a presentation called Once Upon a Time in the Future. And this is all about the unfortunate destruction of a local landmark. Jaguar Bennett, who markets himself as Fresno's most offensive comedian, is doing a very timely show called Reality is Optional. Les Kirkendall, an extremely talented comedic storyteller, is bringing his show The Real Black Swan. Then there's Martin Dockery. If you are in the mood for some very funny and very surreal social commentary, check out Right Now. Melanie Gall, who has been a guest on this show, is bringing her show Piaf and Brel, The Impossible Concert. Melanie is an extremely talented singer, and this show is full of beautiful songs. Don't miss it. Then Eileen and I will be involved in one of the presentations of The Fringe Factor, and this is from Minion Productions, run, of course, by Grant Knutson, who was also a guest on this show. It's a funny, just crazy game show. It's almost like a Japanese game show, so be sure to check that out. It's a lot of fun. There are, of course, links to all the Rogue Festival stuff in the show description, and I encourage you to see as many shows as possible. If you love interesting theater, good storytelling, or just need a good laugh, you will find something wonderful at the Rogue Festival. Plus, if you're like me, you might just find that little kernel of inspiration you're in need of that will lead you down a new and wonderful path. Life is filled with wonderful things. So go out or go online and experience something new, because you only live once. So as promised, I'm going to play the Fugue section of that Prelude and Fugue in G by Johann Sebastian Bach. So please be sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please leave a comment and hit that like button for me. Next week we'll feature the part 3 of my conversation with Don Lewis, and I'll have a mid-Rogue Festival report. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.